U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken heads to the Middle East to push for truce in Gaza. U.S. hits cruise missile sites in recent strikes against the Houthis. The United Nations envoy Hans Grunberg visits Tehran to discuss Yemen's latest peace efforts. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is English News with me, Shaza Abdelbaei. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken visits the Middle East in his fifth trip since the IOF war in Gaza. Blinken is expected to discuss the situation in the Middle East with different partners and will concentrate on Gaza. This report has more details.
On Monday, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken traveled to the Middle East for another crisis tour in an effort to broker a new truce in the Israeli aggression on occupied Palestinian territory as bloodshed in southern Gaza resumed. Blinken is slated to visit Saudi Arabia, Israel, Egypt, and Qatar on his fifth trip to the region since Hamas's October 7 strike. He is expected to discuss a proposed truce fleshed out in a Paris meeting in January with top U.S., Israeli, Egyptian, and Qatari officials. The proposed truce would pause fighting for an initial 6 weeks as Hamas frees hostages in exchange for Palestinian detainees. Hamas has said no agreement has yet been reached, while some Israeli officials have expressed opposition to any perceived concessions. Prior to the trip, he emphasized the importance of urgently addressing humanitarian needs in Gaza, as relief organizations repeatedly warned about the destructive impact of almost 5 months of war in the beleaguered enclave. Despite Blinken's remark, the U.S. continues to suspend their funding to the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, which provides vital aid to more than 1.1 million people in Gaza suffering from catastrophic hunger and the outbreak of diseases. Gazans are facing dire humanitarian conditions, with very limited access to clean water and sanitation amid relentless bombardment. Dubbed a pressure cooker of despair by the United Nations, Rafah now hosts more than half of Gaza's 2.4 million people displaced due to Israel's assault.
More than 30 Palestinians were killed in Israeli bombing in the past 24 hours in the city of Deir Balah in central Gaza. The Israeli occupation made a series of intense attacks that targeted various areas, which resulted in deaths of scores of martyrs, the destruction of citizens' homes, and the sabotage of infrastructure. The death toll in Gaza is due to the Israeli aggression has risen to more than 27,000, and the number of injured people rose to more than 66,000, while more than 8,000 are still missing under the rubble.
As of today, over 100,000 Gazans are either dead, injured, or missing and presumed dead. WHO has faced great difficulty even to reach hospitals in southern Gaza. Heavy fighting has been reported near hospitals in Khan Yunis, severely impeding access to health facilities for patients, health workers, and supplies. During a UN mission on Monday, WHO delivered medical supplies to Nasser Medical Complex. Other missions to deliver fuel and food were denied. Despite challenges, Nasser Hospital continues to offer health services, although at reduced capacity. The hospital is operating with a single ambulance. Donkey carts are being used for transporting patients. Yesterday, we made another attempt to get food to Nasser, but due to delays, the food was taken from the trucks by crowds who are also desperate for food. Our teams on the ground report increasing food shortages for medical staff and patients, with only one meal per day. The risk of famine is high and increasing each day, with persistent hostilities and restricted humanitarian access. We continue to call for safe access for humanitarian personnel and supplies, for the hostages to be released, for health care to be protected and not attacked or militarized. And we continue to call for a ceasefire.
The Israeli occupation forces executed a child at a military checkpoint east of occupied Jerusalem. Eyewitnesses reported that the occupation forces shot the child Wahid Shadi, 14 years old from Jerusalem, and left him bleeding. Israeli settlers stormed the courtyards of the Blessed Al-Aqsa Mosque under the protection of the occupation police. Eyewitnesses reported that dozens of settlers stormed Al-Aqsa, carried out tours of its courtyards, and performed rituals. The occupation police station at the gates of the Old City and Al-Aqsa Mosque also prevented citizens from entering. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and his British counterpart David Cameron discussed the situation in the Red Sea in light of the Houthi escalation. The two diplomats also discussed international action to hold the Houthis accountable for their attacks on ships. The Houthi militia says the U.S.-British aircraft have targeted the Dune area in Hodeidah west of the country. The U.S. intends to launch further strikes at Houthis to degrade their military capabilities. This report has more details.
4 anti-ship missiles that were set to launch against ships in the Red Sea and a land attack cruise missile were targeted by the U.S. On Sunday, the U.S. launched further attacks in Yemen against the Houthis, who are supported by Iran. As a form of self-defense against the Houthi land assault cruise missile, it explained the strikes. This comes a day after the U.S. military struck the militias in Iraq and Syria in retribution for a deadly attack on U.S. forces in Jordan, and before the U.K. and U.S. launched operations against 36 Houthi targets in Yemen. Additionally, the White House issued a warning that the U.S. plans to continue attacking the Houthis. It also issued a warning stating that the U.S. plans to attack the Houthis in the Middle East once more. They plan on carrying out further attacks and actions to firmly convey that the U.S. would retaliate if its soldiers are assaulted and American citizens are murdered. The attacks represent the most recent leg of a struggle that has erupted across the Middle East since October 7th, when the Palestinian resistance, backed by Iran, overthrew the Israeli occupation of the Gaza Strip. With a declaration of sympathy for the Palestinians, the Houthis have joined the conflict throughout the area. And Hezbollah has opened fire on targets of the Israeli occupation at the Israeli-Lebanese border. U.S. soldiers have shot upon the Iraqi militias in both Syria and Iraq. In addition, the Houthis firing on ships in the Red Sea and at the Israeli occupation itself. Iraqi militias have opened fire on U.S. soldiers in Syria and Iraq. Despite supporting those militias, Iran has refrained from taking a direct part in the fight thus far. And regarding the possibility that the U.S. would target locations within Iran, the U.S. military has been extremely cautious to avoid.
Houthi militia said Italy is going to become a target if it takes part in attacks against Yemen. Head of the Houthi Supreme Revolutionary Committee warned that Italy must be neutral in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and put pressure on Israel to stop attacks on Gaza. Italy said on Friday it would provide the admiral in command of a European Union Red Sea naval mission it has joined to protect ships from attacks by the Houthi militia. The UN Special Envoy to Yemen, Hans Grunberg, visited Tehran. The UN envoy also stressed the need to maintain the progress made towards the political process in Yemen and the need to de-escalate in the region. This report has more details.
The UN Special Envoy for Yemen, Hans Grunberg, visited Tehran and met with the Iranian Foreign Minister and other senior officials and diplomats. 2 weeks prior to his Iran visit, UN Envoy Grunberg held discussions in Riyadh on current challenges and ways to protect recent progress towards a nationwide ceasefire. In his meetings, the Special Envoy stressed the need to safeguard the progress made last year, measures to improve Yemenis' living conditions, and the resumption of a Yemeni-owned political process under UN auspices. Discussions also focused on the need to de-escalate tensions at the regional level and to prevent a relapse into the cycle of violence which plagued Yemen until the UN brokered truce of 2022. Grunberg noted with serious concern the increasingly precarious regional context and its adverse impact on peace efforts in Yemen. He urged all involved to exercise maximum restraint and to prioritize diplomatic channels and calls for de-escalation over military options. For its part, the Iranian Foreign Ministry expressed its concern over the military attacks conducted by the US and the UK on Yemen and condemned US strikes on Friday against targets in Syria and Iraq. It also noted the redesignation of the Houthis as a terrorist organization in the US has added complexity to the situation, hindering potential political resolutions. The West has increased pressure on Yemen after the Houthi movement took to the sea to declare its support for Palestinians following Israel's devastating war on the enclave. Houthi forces have been targeting several ships owned by Israel or bound for ports in the occupied territories in the strategic Red Sea. Israel's unrelenting onslaughts have so far killed over 27,000 people.
Saudi Minister of Defense Prince Khalid bin Salman met at the World Defense Show in Riyadh with the UK Defense Secretary Grant Shapps. The two officials discussed the partnership between the two nations and the latest regional and international developments in addition to matters of mutual interest.
من قبل يعني المكافحة لمدة يعني ايش اقول لك 15 كيلو، واحنا يعني نمشي ونسعى للماء يعني بتعب، مشقة، كانت مشقة الأسرة ذا العيال الأطفال ذا. الآن مريح، نحمد الله ونشكره، الماء يصب ونعمة وكل حاجة، يعني ما عاد شيء معانا.
Tribal leaders in Al Jawf held a meeting where they renewed unity against the crimes of the Houthi militia. In addition, this comes after leaders from the Houthi militia killed a member of Bani Nuf tribes in an ambush. Military sources said that the government forces' artillery targeted a bulldozer used by the Houthi militia to create new fortifications in Taz. The same sources reported that the Houthi militia established a training camp for child recruits and sent reinforcements to the city fronts. Coming next in the news. Houthi-planted mines continue to kill Yemeni civilians nationwide.
Stands out for its richness, complexity, and distinctiveness. Coffee cuppers seem to breathe through their very souls with every sip. They appreciate the journey of the seed, dating back to when it was just an idea in the farmer's mind, through to its journey into their cup. There are various forms of preparation, followed with almost ritualistic precision. Yemeni coffee, an endless story of discovery.
Welcome back. Houthi-planted mines continue to claim civilians' lives in Yemen. Saudi demining Masan project has contributed to clearing Yemeni lands from such a threat. However, dozens of civilians are still killed due to those mines. This report has more details.
Houthi mines continue to snatch the lives of Yemenis. A Yemeni boy, Omar Sulaihi, died in February after being injured by a mine planted by the Houthis in a livestock grazing area near the Red Sea coast. The mines, which were planted by the Houthis before they were expelled, pose a constant threat to thousands of residents and displaced people in the liberated areas north of Hajjah Governorate. The family's loss was the most horrific, as the boy's lower and upper limbs were amputated. The Houthis have previously exploded mines in areas frequented by livestock herders, causing injuries to children and causing disabilities. The area is classified as Bani Hassan, one of the most heavily contaminated with mines planted by the Houthis before their withdrawal. In January, several children, including Omar's sister, suffered injuries from mine explosions. The Houthis have also been responsible for the deaths of farmers and children in the liberated areas. Yemen has experienced a series of devastating mine explosions and projectiles, resulting in the deaths of 7 civilians and injuries to 5 others. The Yemeni Landmine Observatory reported 15 casualties in November due to a landmine planted by the Houthis and projectiles left over from war in 5 incidents. The explosions occurred in 4 governorates, causing destruction and damage to 3 civilian vehicles and the death of 13 livestock heads. The Saudi demining project in Yemen, Massam, has played a crucial role in clearing vast areas of landmines and explosives, enabling tens of thousands of farmers and beekeepers to resume their work.
The health office in Hajj carried out the first campaign in more than 6 years to vaccinate against polio. In addition, they also stated, according to the Deputy Director of the Governorate Health Office, he said the campaign targeted 50 children under the age of 1.5 years, which is the first immunization dose that targeted children on the 2 islands received out of more than 100 children. Recent UN statistics revealed that more than 100,000 displaced people are at risk of being evicted from their homes due to their inability to meet rental requirements. According to the Humanitarian Response Plan in Yemen for the current year, 120,000 displaced people are at high risk of eviction. This year's Humanitarian Response Plan includes the need to provide funding amounting to $20.8 million to continue providing assistance to the displaced in paying rents. The level of internal displacement in Yemen recorded a sharp decline in the 4th week of last January. In addition, the International Organization for Migration reported that it monitored 21 families consisting of 126 people who were displaced at least once in that period. Taz Merchants Forum called for a partial strike in the liberated governorates for 3 days this week. This strike comes as part of escalatory steps to denounce the continued deterioration of the currency and the rise in prices, indicating that the situation is catastrophic and silence cannot be tolerated. The forum said that if the government does not respond to the demands of merchants, it will escalate to a comprehensive strike. The government delegation failed to convince insurance protection clubs to reduce the cost of marine insurance on ships arriving at the ports of Aden and Mukalla. A government delegation held discussions with British protection clubs with the aim of arranging to reduce the high cost of insurance due to the war, but the government was unable to provide a financial deposit of $50 million to reduce the costs. Here's a reminder of the main headlines. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken heads to the Middle East to push for truce in Gaza. U.S. hits crude missile sites in recent strikes against the Houthis. The United Nations envoy Hans Grunberg visits Tehran to discuss Yemen's latest peace efforts. This is the end of the news. Thank you for watching.